Yo, what is up everybody? It's Jay the Great here, and today we have a very special video, and as you can tell, the title of that is Ranking Real-Life Criminals Based on Their Chances of Surviving Dexter. So folks, with Dexter Resurrection less than a month away, and me only recently thoroughly enjoying Dexter, as well as its various spin-offs, I thought that this would be a cool video topic to do. So, as you can see here, we do have some of the most infamous killers that we know of, but also other types of criminals. And I added these other types of criminals to make this even more interesting of a discussion, to bring other obstacles to discuss for Dexter if he were to go after these criminals. So I thought it would be interesting to bring in some other types as well, which we will get to. So here you can see the tier lists of difficulty that I have set up for the criminals we'll be going through. So at the top we have impossible, meaning Dexter simply couldn't get the kill. Then we have very difficult kill, meaning it would be a high difficulty kill to achieve and even unlikely to achieve. It's possible, but very improbable that he would achieve it. Essentially meaning he would have to have a flawless execution from the stalking stage all the way to the actual execution of the criminal, right? So pretty self-explanatory. Then we have would require some effort, more so medium difficulty, maybe 50-50 if you want to look at it that way. It is possible, fairly probable, but it would require Dexter to be near or at his best, right? So that's that tier. Then we have simple kill, which is a one episode type of kill, if you want to use that as an analogy. He would have to put in some effort, but it wouldn't be anything too difficult for him, and he would most likely succeed. Then we have no effort, which is simply a filler kill and a very, very easy kill for Dexter to achieve. So those are the tiers of difficulty here. So starting off with our first criminal, we have Charles Manson. So for you folks that don't know who Charles Manson is, he was an infamous high-profile cult leader, I believe in the late 1900s if I'm not mistaken, and he was so influential that he would cause others to kill for him and do all these weird, heinous acts for him. He essentially convinced these people in his cult that he is their master and that following him will lead them to the promised land or heaven or whatever it was specifically. So the obstacle for Dexter wouldn't be Charles Manson's intelligence or his physicality, it would be his influence. Now, if people are willing to kill for this guy, clearly they're willing to die for him too. They're clearly going to be willing to protect him, right? And Charles Manson was very high profile in the late 1900s. Very high profile, meaning Charles Manson would be aware of this and would probably have his cult following around him at all times or close to all times, right? Meaning it would be hard for Dexter to get close to him without being spotted and in real trouble if there are various cult members around him and they attack him or something like that. So that would be the main obstacle for Dexter. Now, I don't think it's a very difficult kill, but I do think it would require some effort because of that obstacle, because of the influence, because of the extremely devoted cult members this guy had, right? I mean, they're willing to kill for him again. That means they're very willing to die for him too, right? That would be the main obstacle. Aside from that, Charles Manson isn't extremely intelligent. He isn't, super skilled in military tactics, at least to my knowledge. So that's the real obstacle for him. And because of that, I do think it would require some effort. He would have to prep very carefully. But again, Dexter's very intelligent, very methodical. I do think he would get the job done. So next up, we got Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's MO is essentially targeting vulnerable women, leading them to isolation, and then killing them, right? That was his whole MO. He was very sadistic. He was almost prideful about the kills that he had once he was caught. And the only thing he feared, ironically enough, was death. And that's what they gave him, right? So Dexter would have no trouble taking care of this guy. This guy isn't known as a physical force. He isn't especially intelligent. He has nothing that stands out as far as an obstacle for Dexter. He was just a crazy person that got a thrill from killing vulnerable women. So honestly, this would not be very difficult for Dexter at all. He's just some regular guy with a sadistic mind. I think Dexter would not have a hard time at all stalking him, finding or creating a window of opportunity to sedate him and then kill him. It wouldn't be very difficult at all. Ted Bundy was very active, meaning as a killer, right? So him trying to isolate women means he's also isolated, which would give Dexter the perfect opportunity to sedate him and maybe save a woman's life in the process, right? So this is a simple kill. It would require a little bit of prep, a little bit of preparation, setting up the opportunity, and that's all she wrote. The guy would be dead. It wouldn't be a very difficult kill. So next up, we got John Wayne Gacy. So John Wayne Gacy, also known as Puggo the Clown, targeted young males, and after killing them, would bury them under his backyard. In fact, the way he was caught was by chance. Right? He happened to let law enforcement use his restroom. They smelled a very foul odor, and they put two and two together and ended up searching his house and finding dozens of bodies underneath his house. Right? So that's essentially how he was caught. Clearly, he covered his tracks pretty well. He was seen as a respected member of the community. I think he was a city council member or something like that. I did watch a documentary on the guy a while ago. However, he wasn't perfect. In fact, in that documentary I watched, there were actually people that gave their testimony about these weird moments they would have with Gacy when alone. He'd have these weird urges that would suddenly spring up, and he'd have this bizarre behavior, right? Being very aggressive and very forward, right? So he does make mistakes. I do think that Dexter wouldn't have a hard time finding evidence once he confirms that this guy is the primary suspect for his next kill, right? I do think it wouldn't be very difficult to find evidence. When stalking him in a moment where he's alone with someone, he would see this bizarre behavior more than likely, put two and two together. And also, what Dexter has that law enforcement doesn't is absolute freedom to gather evidence. He doesn't need probable cause. He doesn't need a warrant. He doesn't need any of these conditions met to gather evidence, right? That's one of the main advantages Dexter had over law enforcement, which is why he was able to find the real culprit of murders faster than law enforcement, right? Because he didn't have this red tape obstacle that law enforcement does with laws and legality and things of that nature. So I do think it would require some effort. John Wayne Gacy, again, got caught by chance. He wasn't even a suspect, to my knowledge at least, until very, very far into the investigation of these disappearances, right? Of these young men that he would take. So I don't think it would be simple for Dexter to gather evidence. I do think it would require some effort. I do think he'd be easier to kill than Charles Manson because he doesn't have the influence that Charles Manson had. He doesn't have a posse around him at all times. So I do think he'd get the kill easier, but I don't think it'd be simple. So I'd put him right there. Next up, we got Dennis Rader. So Dennis Rader actually reminds me of Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer, because this guy was described as a very polite and nice individual by his community, right? He had a normal life. He was married. He had children. He had a degree from a higher university institution. The guy was a regular guy and was respected by many. Now, also like Arthur Mitchell, he even had cool-off periods in between kills, right? So he was able to get away with murder for a long, long time. Yeah, a very long time. So clearly this guy wasn't dumb by any means. Now, when I was reading into him, when others that knew of him from work or whatever were questioned about him, he did have these bizarre tendencies that would come out. Again, like Arthur Mitchell, he would display this erratic, aggressive behavior at times, almost as if that side of him couldn't be contained, right? We saw that with Arthur Mitchell as well. So considering how hard Arthur Mitchell was to catch, it would also require some effort. I almost want to say a very difficult kill just because of how long this guy went without being caught. Now, the only difference between him and Arthur Mitchell, though, is that he would taunt the police. He would taunt them, and I think that would be his fatal flaw if Dexter was on his heels. Because Dexter, again, doesn't need probable cause, doesn't need a warrant, doesn't need any of this. He would go and attempt to obtain these letters or whatever this guy left to try and taunt the police to gather evidence. And through that, would find that Dennis Rader is the killer. I think it'd be harder than Gacy to catch and kill. I'm gonna say this, for now I'm gonna put him at the top of what requires some effort. Would not be easy. His toughest kill for sure. I'm hesitant to still put him here. We'll get through the list and maybe I'll change it and put him up, but for now I'll keep him here. Next up, we got our first non-serial killer criminal, or just someone that's not only known for killing people. We got El Chapo. So I'm sure many of you guys know who this is. If you don't, he was a high-profile cartel member in the Mexican cartel. So clearly he had a lot of resources, right? The cartel is very powerful in Mexico. They take over cities. They've caused police departments to quit. I mean, these guys have tons of power, right? And money. So El Chapo, being at the high position, would have manpower and would have many, many resources at his disposal. This is by far Dexter's toughest kill. Think about it this way. He'd have to go to another country. He would have to find El Chapo. A guy in his position is probably always moving because of his high profile image and his high profile persona, and then would have to get close enough without getting killed by his posse of cartel members. That's very difficult for one man, no matter how skilled you are. I'm going to say probably impossible, to be quite honest. Dexter is very skilled, very talented at what he does, but to go up against an entire organization, an entire drug empire, is just too much for one man. It really is. In real life, the Mexican government, an entire government, has a hard time against the cartel, let alone one man. So I do think this is the first one he wouldn't be able to achieve. The first kill he wouldn't be able to achieve. Next up, we got another drug kingpin, Pablo Escobar. Honestly, he'd be even more difficult than El Chapo, and let me tell you why, if you don't know about Escobar. This guy was in the Colombian government. That's how powerful he was. He was running a drug empire and was so influential in the country of Colombia that he was able to be, if I'm not mistaken, elected as a governmental official. This guy was a kingpin. I mean, he was the pinnacle of the cartel in the 90s. So Dexter would have to go again to another country and attempt to get close to a guy with nationwide influence, worldwide influence. I mean, this guy was exporting his product, or the product, to other countries. That's how powerful this guy was. So yeah, Dexter would not even get close. The guy's just too powerful, too much manpower, too much influence, too much money, you name it, impossible. Next up, going back to serial killers, we got Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. So Richard Ramirez had a terrible upbringing during his childhood, turned him into this sadistic killer that enjoyed inflicting pain. He would go out into the night and randomly just attack people by various methods: shooting, beating, strangulation, you name it. Now, that's a perfect candidate for Dexter's ritual. Dexter is a creature of the night. Dexter thrives in the night. When he learns of this guy, right, and he confirms that Richard Ramirez is the killer, he would have a field day with Richard Ramirez. There would be no effort for him. Richard Ramirez was just, again, like Ted Bundy, some crazy guy that got a kick out of hurting other people, killing other people. Dexter would have no problem. And due to the heinous nature of this man, Dexter would be motivated. I do think Dexter would kill him quite easily. I really do. I think it'd be a little bit more difficult than Ted because his MO isn't exactly as consistent as Bundy. Bundy was always the same. And, try to find a vulnerable woman, get her isolated, kill her. With Richard, it was more random. He would pull someone over in the middle of the night. He would break into someone's house. He would follow someone in the alley. You name it. There's just various ways, right? So it would take a little longer for Dexter to triangulate Richard Ramirez as a suspect. Wouldn't take long at all, though. I'm just saying he'd be a little bit more difficult than Ted, but still a simple kill. Next up, we got Gary Ridgeway, aka the Green River Killer. So this guy's one of the most infamous killers of all time, in the United States at least as well. His MO was strangulation for the most part. Now, he had a pretty normal life, got away with it for a while, but nothing stands out as far as him being someone of worthy note as far as Dexter is concerned. Maybe he'd be harder than these guys because he had more of a regular life. Richard Ramirez was just some junkie that would kill people, and Ted was in isolation at all times. Gary Ridgway had more of a life, I believe, from my knowledge. I would say he's a simple kill as well, but probably the hardest of their simple kills so far. Next up, we got Jeffrey Epstein. So this guy has resources, right? He was a billionaire. He had a pedophile ring, an elite pedophile ring with elites, right? People that are considered elite socioeconomically, right? So his resources would be the problem for Dexter, right? Getting to Jeffrey Epstein successfully. The guy had an island. He had a lot of resources. I'm sure he had a lot of employees looking out for him due to financial incentive. Those obstacles would be the most difficult for Dexter. Now, I do think Epstein is a possible kill. It'd be very difficult, but I think it's possible because there's nothing to my knowledge that indicates that Epstein had a huge amount of manpower around him at all times, right? He was just a guy that was very wealthy running this pedophile ring. That's all he was. His resources would make it difficult for Dexter to get to him, but I think eventually he would. Again, Dexter would have to be very careful. I'm sure Epstein is not easy to catch, right? I mean, the guy was able to get away with what he was doing for a long time, but but I do think Dexter would get to him and kill him. It'd be very, very difficult. Again, because of the sheer amount of money and resources he has and influence he has. Dexter even coming after him could put his own life in danger. Right? All these other people that have been in contact with this guy wouldn't want Epstein being caught or killed, and that would just make things more difficult for Dexter. But again, I do think Dexter is intelligent enough to get the job done. He's skilled enough. He'd definitely be motivated. He definitely hates pedophiles. We all saw how he took out that one pedophile, W. Dexter, for that. So clearly he'd be very motivated, and I do think he'd get it done, but it wouldn't be easy. Next up, we got Osama bin Laden. So he was the leader and founder of Al-Qaeda, a terrorist organization, primarily lived in the Middle East. So for Dexter to even get to this guy would be very difficult. He has an entire organization under him with military skill, from my understanding. I don't think Dexter would even get close. In fact, I think he'd be more difficult to get to than Chapo. From my understanding, Al-Qaeda was militarily trained at a professional level, and Osama bin Laden was at the pinnacle of that organization. This is all I have to say. It's as simple as this. A Navy SEAL team had to implement a strategic mission just to take the guy out. They had to strategize, they had to plan out, they had to send the world's best assassins to kill this man. That's all I have to say. I mean, what else is there to say? It'd be extremely difficult to kill this man. Next up, we got Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was impulsive, had a very clear MO. He would target men for the most part, lure them into his home, kill them. Right, that was his MO. It couldn't get any easier for Dexter. Dexter could play himself as bait. He could play bait, play possum. That's all he would need to do. Get into his house, see all the evidence there, and see Dahmer try to kill him, and he would easily overpower him, sedate him, take his life. It would not be... This is probably the easiest kill. The easiest one for Dexter, by far. There's not even much more to say. Lastly, we got the Zodiac killer. So I thought this would be interesting because he was never caught, right? But here's the thing. Dexter lives in modern day. Dexter is a forensics expert. Dexter knows the mind of a serial killer. And finally, like Dennis Rader, the Zodiac killer would taunt police. Right? So in modern day, if this guy was around taunting police, Dexter would quickly gather evidence. It would be very easy for him. He would triangulate the culprit, who he is, where he's at, and then that's all she wrote. He would find him, create a window of opportunity, sedate him, take his life. It would not be very difficult. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say he'd be harder to kill than probably these guys. I don't know about Ridgeway. Ridgeway got away with it for a long time too, and it was more in modern day in comparison to the Zodiac killer. He was active, I believe, in the 90s, while the Zodiac killer was active in the 50s, 60s, when it was easy to get away with such a thing because of a lack of technology and a lack of knowledge as far as forensics is concerned. He would be harder to kill than these three. But again, a simple kill. Just some regular guy taunting police, thinking that he's in some sick cat and mouse game. So there you guys have it. That's the list. What do you guys think? Was I accurate? Did I cook? Did I not? If you have any thoughts at all or any recommendations for similar videos, let me know. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. This is Gacy signing out. Stay classy.